This session is being recorded as well for later viewing. So if for those of you who couldn't make it, you can watch it on YouTube a little bit later. Thank you for joining us for the latest edition of the UTIA Communicators Group. Today we have Dr. Chris Sneed and Mr. Chuck Denny, and they're going to talk to us about media relations. And that's something that a lot of us don't do, but really it's a good thing to be prepared for if the media ever calls you and wants to have an interview scheduled or they want to talk to you. And what's interesting about this training today is that we're taking this from two perspectives. We're not just taking it from, a media perspective, but we're taking it from the perspective of an agent/specialist and how they would work with the media, and then also from a media perspective. So Chris is going to present from the viewpoint of an agent specialist and how they work with the media and how they get their stories out. And Charles is going to present from the media perspective. Since he has a number of years working in the media, he can tell you that perspective of what is a story, how to work with the media, what they're interested in, and different areas like that. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Charles and let them take over and share their knowledge with us on this subject. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you, Doug. It's good to be with you all this morning from the Eastern Region office here in Knoxville. I'm going to start a share screen so you can see the presentation that Charles and I will be using. Our goal is to go through our presentation and then save some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have some questions as we're going through the presentation, just jot those down and Charles will answer them for you.
Yep. We see you, Chris.
All right, let's see here. Can you see the full screen, Doug, of the presentation?
Yes, we see it all.
Perfect, great. Again, I'm going to be talking about from a perspective of an extension specialist and a former extension agent. And for some reason, when I was putting this PowerPoint presentation together, I was feeling very much in a pirate theme. So we're going to talk about this in terms of TV treasure. When I was back in the county, I had the pleasure of doing monthly segments with WBIR, our NBC affiliate here in Knoxville. I really loved doing those interviews. I would say that that's probably going to be one of the highlights of my time from being in the county. And here I am with one of our extension interns who is now an extension agent in the Eastern region as well. And we're just having some fun before we go on to do the news story at WBIR. It was great developing a relationship with them. And it's a relationship that I still have even today. So keeping with our pirate theme, I've kind of put together 7 steps for searching for TV treasure. And the first step is really to determine the value of the story that you're bringing to the news outlet. We might be very excited about doing a 4-H public speaking contest out in Decatur, Tennessee, where I grew up, and having 400 4-Hers there in the competition. But what we have to ask ourselves is, how would that story resonate with the larger viewing audience? That particular county is served by Chattanooga. That's their news media outlet. And there are a variety of counties that make up that viewing area. And anytime you have a story, I think it's important to look at how you can frame that story so that individuals across the viewing area can really resonate with what it is you're saying. A lot of times that involves us taking a step back from a news story, maybe looking at it at a new angle, putting a new twist on it to make it really fit with what is considered news. And that's what Charles will be talking about. One of the things that we have to do is really understand our news outlets. I think the best way for folks in the county, and even for specialist faculty as well, to understand the news outlets are to simply watch TV. When you start watching the different news programs, it becomes pretty apparent that there are certain reporters that have stories that they love. For example, and with the NBC affiliate here in Knoxville, I know that my good friend Robin, she loves stories about family, she loves stories about home, she loves stories about gardening, and any time that there was anything remotely related to those, I knew I could pitch that story to her, and that would really hook with her because those were some of her personal interests. Now, of course, reporters could also be assigned to certain beats and topics to cover, and so you would want to know who is the consumer person that's doing a lot of the consumer news, who's the person that's doing the news related to perhaps the economy or to jobs. Those would be the people that I think you would have more success with pitching your story. When I was actually making the connection and doing the interviews, I always found number 3 to be a lifesaver. And after I'd actually set up an interview and established a topic that we were going through, I would send the news station a set of talking points. And these talking points really saved me. Because what the talking points did for me is they kept me on message. You know, I love politics, and I love this political season that we're in. And good politicians always have a way of coming back to their message. And I think we, as extension professionals, can learn from keeping on message. Regardless of the questions that we were asked, whether they're questions that are designed to lead us one way or the other on a particular topic, it's good to have our thoughts outlined. It's good to know what we're going to say before we go into the interview. It really helped me to stay on point. The other thing that talking points do is they help the news station as well. The producer at WBIR always loved the talking points that I sent her because she would actually copy and paste them and put together the slides that she was going to show during our television interview. The other thing that she would do is she would actually take and cut and paste the content from my talking points right into the closed caption for the television or for the news program. The talking points were really a win-win, and I would highly suggest anytime you have the opportunity to put some talking points together beforehand, to definitely do that. Also include at the top of the talking points your name and your title and the name of our institution. There are so many times that we have been called so many things in the media. We're the Agricultural Extension Service, we're the UT Extension Service, we're UT Extension. It's amazing how many different ways we're sometimes labeled in the media. Having that information right at the top of the talking points really does help for them to get it right. Before going for an interview, I always say it is a good idea to follow up. When I was doing my monthly interviews with WBIR, I will tell you that I was not breaking news. I was filling time. There were many times that I would be driving to the station and I would get a phone call that a spaceship had landed in Market Square or some wonderful thing had happened. And guess what? Chris got the boot that day because talking about consumer economics topics just doesn't compare to aliens in Market Square. So don't take it personally. It definitely does happen, and it is important to follow up with them. And of course, we would always reschedule for another week, and that's just fine. I'm on their time and on their dime, and I have to realize that sometimes big news stories do happen. Number 5 should go without saying, but it is important to actually show up when you have committed for the interview. And then number 6, I think it's important to follow up after the interview. Follow-up emails, in my opinion, really mean nothing today. We get so many emails, but how about a handwritten thank you note with your business card included inside? What that does is that forces that reporter to open that thank you note to actually have something tangible to touch, and they can put that thank you note on their desk. They have to look at it. They have to think about you. And so I think taking the time to send a handwritten thank you note after the interview, including your business card, letting them know they can reach out to you in the future is very helpful. And then finally, being sure to file that contact away so you have that information when you need it again. There are some cautions that I would give. There is extra prep work when it does come to doing an interview. I was amazed at how long it actually takes to get ready for just a little 3-minute interview. You're going to get some last-minute phone calls. Charles and I were talking before the presentation. It does seem like that the media works up into the very last minute. And so you can expect those phone calls. I've gotten weekend calls, evening calls. Believe it or not, on Black Friday, I've even gotten holiday calls wanting to do news stories. If you're trying to build a relationship with the news station, I would say in some cases it's worth doing an evening or a holiday interview, depending on your schedule. The other thing that we deal with a lot in our Knoxville market is reporter turnover. I remember I developed a good relationship with this reporter. I went in to do a recorded segment for one of his stories, and he told me, oh, by the way, this is my last day. I'm going to Seattle. And so once again, I had to establish another relationship with a totally different person and really sell myself and what I had to offer to the news station. And then also, you can get into media burnout, especially when you're doing these interviews a lot, but it can be lots of fun. I would always say that we want to represent our institution and our university well by wearing neat and appropriate clothing. I used to think, oh, I can get away with wearing jeans today because I'm going to be behind the news desk during the interview. Well, guess what? That's the day they want you to sit on the sofa and they do a full shot showing you in jeans and a dress shirt. So my suggestion would be just be prepared because you never know where they're going to stick you for this interview. When I first started doing the interviews, I didn't know where to look and I had no clue what was going on. There was no flashing red light on a camera, at least that I could see. There were actually 4 cameras around me and there was no camera person at all. And the reporter gave me the best advice. And she simply said, just look at me and let's just have a conversation. And I think that was the best thing in the world. Just to know that I could look at her and it was just like the two of us were talking about a topic, and a topic that I happen to really like. Finally, know your message, which goes back to the talking points. And then at times you have to admit that on some things you don't know. If you're asked a question, I always try to divert back to my talking points. But you do have to realize that there are some things that you simply don't know. And I'll tell you, it's a lot better to just admit, I don't have that answer right now, than it is to just try to make up an answer. And of course, stay focused, stay on those talking points, and most of all, enjoy the moment. There are not many people who have the opportunity to be engaged with the news media, who have the opportunity to go out and do interviews, and who have the real title of being subject matter experts, whether you're at the county or whether you're at the state or regional level. And I really think we should savor and enjoy those opportunities that we have to work with the news media. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Charles Denny for his take on working with media.
Okay, well, thanks, Chris. That's really good information there. And to kind of expand, Chris talked about making yourself available to the media. What I'm going to talk about is kind of making the work you do available to the media. In other words, pitching story ideas about programs that we do or events that we have going on, things like that. And I think many of our people kind of struggle with, why does the media not think this is a big dang deal? It is to me,
right?
And what I'm going to offer is kind of the perspective of the media about news in general and that kind of thing. And Chris, if you can come to us. Can they see me?
I can, yep. Just 1 second.
Just real quickly, I want to show you the cover of my favorite magazine, which is Psychology Today. It came in the mail 2 days ago. And one of the cover stories is about rewriting your life story. And it talks about, not to go into too much detail, but it talks about, taking events or things that have happened to you in your lifetime and kind of changing your perspective about how you think about them today. It doesn't mean trying to block out something and forget about something. It means, you can control your thinking about it today by kind of reframing it. And I tie that in with us because if we kind of reframe the way we think about more traditional things that we do here and reframe it in a way to the media, it might be more enticing to them in terms of stories. So moving with that, that takes me to Pink Floyd theory. Okay, so apologies to any fans of Pink Floyd who are out there. My opinion only, I think Pink Floyd is the most overrated band in the history of music. Okay, I don't get why Pink Floyd is put up there with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. But here's my theory. I think somewhere, sometime, a long time ago, someone who was very influential, maybe a person at Rolling Stone magazine, I don't know, but that person said, Pink Floyd is really good. And someone else went, okay, well, if you think Pink Floyd is good, they must be good. And someone else said, oh, okay, so we're all supposed to like Pink Floyd, right? And radio stations followed suit, and now Pink Floyd has sold 200 million albums. As I digress here, that's twice as many as the late, great Prince. And Prince is 1,000 times better, okay? But let me tie this into what we're talking about. Because then the news gods, in much the same vein, and that's one of the news gods, by the way, there. The news gods said, hey, this is news. From now on, this type of story is news. And everyone else went, okay, we'll go along with that. And even though today we've had generations change in news and we've changed the way we deliver the news, kind of the definition of what is news really hasn't changed much. And even the very young people working in particularly TV news today are still kind of holding steadfast to that old definition of news. I keep hoping for a revolution in how we define what is news, and I don't think it's going to be coming. And even as a reporter myself, and I saw Sandra Harbison as well there, when we were reporters about 20 years ago, I at least struggled at times because there was kind of an inconsistent definition of why this story was news, but this similar story was not. And it got kind of confusing and frustrating for me. So let's look a little bit about, well, first of all, how do we kind of define news? Well, and this is just my definition. I think, first of all, some of the best news in terms of what people want to see is information that affects people's lives. Weather. That's why weather is such a big deal in TV news, because weather affects us all. But also a lot of pocketbook issues like the price of food, the price of gas, taxes, that kind of thing. A new law goes into effect, a road closure. That's why traffic is such a big deal. Mm-hmm. These are things that affects people's lives. But not every news story really affects me. It might just be something that I might find interesting to watch or to read about. So sometimes I define news as just information you find interesting. And just about anything can be news. I've answered right here. Mm-hmm. So what does the media think is news? Well, obviously two main categories, crime and politics. Boy, it just seems like if you get your mugshot taken, that's news. Okay. And it's a bit frustrating to me. And yes, I get if some horrific crime is committed, yes, that is, people want to know about it and they want to know the person has been caught and that type of thing. But we see a lot of crime that's just, a person arrested for burglary and their mugshot is on the news, and it's kind of like, 99.999% of Knoxville will behave themselves today. They will obey society's rules. They will go about their jobs and their lives. But it's these, the very, very tiny percentage of people who don't behave themselves today, and that's who's on the news tonight. And it seems to me like, and one reason, Doug has pointed this out in the past, one reason that there is so much crime reported on the news is because, quite frankly, it fills. It's easy to do. It's easy to slap that mugshot up there and get the arrest report and do a story about it. But it kind of creates, I think, a misleading impression of a community. You think, the crime rate must be really high here, when the reality is it isn't. That's what's all on the news. Politics, too. I mean, every time one of the presidential candidates opens their mouths, the national news is there, and that becomes news. And, and I'm just kind of weary of it, quite frankly. But also, local politics is big. And I get, it is important, but it seems like that those two categories just really fill the front page and just take up almost all of a newscast. Over the years, I used to just have those two as the main two categories the media talked about. Over the years, I've added the economy because I think that probably is the most important topic the media reports on. And that's where we might come in there. And then spot news, like Chris said, the alien landing in Market Square. That's a good one. I covered that story many times. But also, but we do have horrific spot news. We had a helicopter crash a few weeks ago in the Smoky Mountains and that type of thing. Spot news is big for particularly TV media, sometimes just because it's very visual, but we get a lot of car wrecks and fires and that really isn't information that affects people's lives. And I'm not sure it's interesting to anybody either if it's not your car or your house. Mm-hmm. So it becomes kind of a bit of a crutch. But then there are other topics of news, and I've tried to think of every news story possible, and I think they'll fall into one of these categories. Let me back up and say, many times the crime, politics, economy, those blend into one another. In other words, the president will talk about job creation, or a politician could be indicted for a crime. They blend over into one another. And but also there are other topics like science. That's where we might come in. With an aging population, health and medical news is very big. Then I get into the E categories: education, the environment, entertainment. Education is a big category that the media covers quite a bit. In fact, I used to do an education beat in another job. Lifestyles and features. And then if you throw in weather and sports, I think just about every possible news story falls into those categories right there. So how do we maybe fit into this, knowing that that's kind of what we're up against? Because like I say, many times we may have an event that we think is a big deal, and we tell the media about it, and they seem to not care. They don't cover it because they're too busy, showing the mugshot or whatever. Well, let's get back to talking about my Psychology Today cover here about what if we reframed the way we presented that event to the reporter, and talk instead about an issue. What really is the issue that's kind of at the crux of this event? Let me give you an example. And this is me going back to politics, the old tired, but 4-H Congress recently in Nashville. Again, you may have heard this is an election year. It's been in the news a little bit, right? But I took 4-H Congress, which, is pretty much the same every year, in terms of what we do. Doesn't minimize what we're doing, but it's pretty much the same. And the media knows this, they know, they go to the state capitol. Blah. Well, I said, well, what if we did a story about teaching kids about the responsibility of voting, that this election year, that many of these kids are following the election. And even though they won't vote this year, they will vote for or against the loser in 2020. Many of these kids will. So this was a story about teaching 4-Hers the responsibility, the privilege, the opportunity about voting. That was taking an event, 4-H Congress, and delving into a bigger issue. So keep that in mind, and again, I see a lot of like local papers where, we have the grip and grin photos. You have the 4-Hers holding their little plaques, and that's great that they've won an award. But what if say it's a livestock award, what if you said to the media, hey, would you like to see the kid caring for their animal? That makes a much better photograph and a better story that way. So kind of how we reframe how we pitch things to the media might make it more enticing for them to cover. Is it convenient for them to cover, within reason? Does it impact people's lives? I think a lot of the extension work that Chris does, he talks about stuff that impacts people's livelihood, their pocketbooks, consumer issues. Information that impacts my life is important to me, and that's interesting to me. The media wants stories. And let me say, the media wants good stories. They don't necessarily want to do all these mug shots and all, but again, many days that's what they need to fill the newscast. So if you offer them a better alternative to that, they're certainly open to it. Now, sometimes we have to ask ourselves the very tough question, okay, we've got this story or this event or this whatever, and, I think it's the biggest dang thing in the world. Mm-hmm. But you have to realistically step outside yourself and say, do other people find this interesting? Does the general population find this interesting? Is it important to them? Because many of us live in a house of mirrors. We're surrounded by, or we work with people who are very similar to us and think the same way, kind of, and what's important to all of us as a group. So we really have to think outside ourselves and outside our group sometimes in terms of, because that media is serving the whole population. Is it understandable? Sometimes we speak our own jargon, particularly in agriculture and things like that. We don't want to dumb it down so much that we're insulting to someone, but on the other hand, we got to put it into words that everybody can understand. Is it visual? Although I will say, any story can be a TV story. I have done TV stories about depression and bullying and elder abuse. Those are things that we had to kind of create video for because we didn't conveniently have those things going on. How do you visually show what depression looks like? So just about anything will work. But obviously, if it's very visual, then that's enticing to the media as well. Do we have people to talk about this? Do we have people who are really affected by this? In all my TV stories, I'll talk to our UT experts, but I also might talk to a farmer or a 4-H'er or a soccer mom or someone who's really impacted by this story. Looking for deeper sides to it, another angle, and it could be an angle to something that's going on in the world or in the country. Maybe we've got a local angle to that. The bottom line, don't try to tell people, the media, how to do a story. I can tell you as a reporter years ago, I was pretty hard-headed. When someone told me how to do a story, I usually did pretty much the opposite, if possible. Because they don't, it's not their job to tell us how to do our jobs. And so at some point, we have to trust them to do their jobs. What we do is we make all the correct information available, make sure they've got everything they need, make sure, as Chris said, that we've stuck to our central point, the message we wanted to make. And then beyond that, it's a bit out of our control. We are not in, because sometimes our people, again, think that us in marketing communications, that we tell the media what to do. No, we don't. We are not their bosses. And we don't want them telling us how to do our job either. So that's how it goes. I mean, at some point you have to just trust the media to do their thing. And a good reporter is going to get it right. They're going to be accurate. They're going to be fair and objective about it. But kind of getting back to what I was talking about earlier, just in determining what is news, the media, I think, not only has the enormous responsibility to cover a story in a fair, objective, and accurate way, but also simply choosing what stories to cover in the first place is an enormous editorial responsibility as well. Because there are many days in reporting that we would choose to cover this, but therefore we're not choosing to cover this. So we're kind of sending the message that we think this is the bigger thing. We're making the editorial decision of this is what we think is important. And then also was how much time did we give it? How much what was the placement of it? If we did 2.5 minutes on it at the top of the newscast versus 30 seconds on something 10 minutes into the newscast, that kind of sends a message to the audience as well. That's an editorial decision as well about what we think of the importance of this story. Everything we do isn't newsworthy. I know that's hard to take sometimes, but every little meeting we have, every little gathering, things like that, is not going to be considered newsworthy by the media and the general public. But many things we do could be newsworthy if we know how to frame it in the right way. So again, and I always make a pitch for story ideas. Give it to me first. Great idea for TV. And there's my contact information. So I appreciate it.
Excellent. Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you and stop screen sharing here.
Okay. Well, thank you guys very much. That was some really, really good information. And And one of the things I was going to touch on, I was writing some notes while you guys were talking, and one of the things, and Sandra, you can hop in too on this as well. When you're pitching a story, and I think this is important, and we do this in our news group meetings as well here at Marketing and Communications. They're almost like an editorial board meeting in a newspaper or in a TV station. And when you're going to pitch a story, I think sometimes you need to step back and say, why should I care? I think that was a very, very valid point that you guys made, that you need to be able to step back. You may think it's a big story, but you've got to take it from another perspective and say, okay, and if you can't come up with a reason to say, why should I care? You need to look for a hook, what we call a hook to the story, that will be interesting to a viewer or a reader. And what is it about this story that is interesting? There might be something on the surface that may not be there, but as you dig into that story, there is a really good angle to it that the media would be interested in. Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that you guys was really, really important to get at that point across.
I think it's always important to make it relatable to people. You know, I mentioned that in many of my stories, many times I don't just have a bunch of scientists and UT experts in it. I have the people who are really affected by it. And that's who the audience can really relate to. Right. Someone like them, right. A parent or a farmer or a kid or a soccer mom. That, again, is getting back to information that affects their lives, and they see how this affects someone else's life, and they say, oh, I can relate to that.
One thing I would always ask myself would be, how does this appeal across the viewing area? You know, sure, this is great news for Knoxville, Tennessee, but how does this appeal to Morgan County? And how does this appeal to the viewers who are up in Jefferson County? So I think keeping that idea in mind. The other thing that I would say, a lot of times, and I've noticed this with field staff, especially when we've done our marketing trainings across the state, we'll get up to talk about TV news, and the first response I get is, oh, we don't have a station in our county. And it's almost like, well, this doesn't apply to us. And I think what we have to realize is you do have a station serving your county. Now, their physical building may not be in your county, and their cars may not be parked in your county in a parking lot, but they certainly are interested in news that's happening in your community because you're part of the viewing area. Right. And I don't know how we can get over that.
If you can see the news, and everybody can, then you have a TV station that's interested in you. Yeah, everybody can't have a TV station. That would be too many TV stations. But almost everybody has a newspaper in their area, maybe a weekly or whatever, but the media reaches virtually everyone.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, one of the things that, I always struck me, and I've said this to Chris before when I've seen his presentation, is how you make yourself a resource for the media, how you are a go-to person for them. Chris, I think you got a question one time about hoverboards catching on fire, didn't you?
I did.
You had to answer that. I remember. Can you talk a little bit about
it? Was actually this.
And now Chris is going to demonstrate. He's going to get on a coverboard right now. Get the coverboard.
It was actually this Christmas, this holiday season. The guy called here from WBIR. He actually called my cell phone and said, we're doing a story on hoverboards, and we need somebody to talk about the consumer response. And, he called about 4:30, and I said, oh, okay, great. When are you doing this story? Oh, it's going on at 6. And I'm like, okay, wonderful. So I told him, I said, well, I really am not an expert on hoverboards, but we have someone who is, and that's Dr. Dina Wise. And so I just passed him on. Luckily, he called Morgan Hall and around 5 o'clock, and there were still some secretaries and folks there, and we were able to get him in contact with Dina, and he got the little soundbite he needed for the story. But I thought, it goes back to that idea of you just have to admit you're not an expert on everything, and certainly I was not an expert on hoverboards and didn't want to be an expert on them. But yeah, it was very interesting to get that call almost near closing time because the story was ready to go for 6 o'clock.
Yeah, that happens a lot too. They call you at at the latest time needing someone. And sometimes it's a scramble on our end to find somebody, to be available. And Sandra, I see you're going to jump in too. And I think that kind of segues into how it's important, even though, to keep up with current events that are going on and see how perhaps a program you work on or an area that you're working in applies to current events, which helps you pitch the story as well. And how you can also be a resource for people as well. And Sandra, I'll turn that over to you.
I was going to say, what Chris did was fabulous, because even if when they call here and they want to speak to one of our experts, and I'm like, well, no, that's really not, if you're going to talk behavior, yes, but if you're going to talk spay and neuter, she's not the doc you need to talk to. And even if we don't have someone here, I always try to be a resource and say, the person that you really need to talk to, if you really are, if it's going to be about this one topic or whatnot, is at the University of X. And this is, so I still am trying to be a resource to that local reporter or to a regional reporter, even though we don't have the expert here. And another thing that we have had to overcome here is, well, I'm not an recognized expert in blah, blah. Well, you're not, but you can speak to the issue. So just because you didn't do your thesis on why bugs don't want to mate when it's dark outside doesn't mean you can't talk about, some of the ramifications and things. And I apologize for coming in late, but it's, I always try to make it easy for the reporters. If they have to travel 30 minutes between interviews or to go get their video or their visuals, then, they're less likely to cover a story that we pitch to them. If we can pitch a story that's a one-stop shopping kind of deal, even if it's not a big blowout kind of story, a reporter is going to be more likely to cover that because it is easy for them. So I always try to make it easy for them. And I don't try to get them to talk to the people within our realm. Talking to the department head or to the dean is probably PC, politically correct, and a smart move on our part, but it isn't always best for the story. So I always try to make sure that they're talking to who they want to, which is what Charles had mentioned earlier. He has the farmers, he has the consumers. You want the best person on there that's going to tell the story and get back to them, respect their time, and don't try to sound smart.
Too smart. Yeah.
I have no problem with that, but don't try to sound, use all these words up here. Speak like you're speaking to eighth graders or explaining this to a middle schooler.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point there, Sandra. And I think that, and Chris and Sandra and Charles, you can speak on this as well. When you're being interviewed by the media, a lot of people think that the media is always looking for the latest controversy, or they're looking for a gotcha moment, or they're looking for some way to get you. And what we deal with, it really doesn't seem to be the case. It's more of they're looking for information and they're looking for some help. And I think this is a real opportunity for us to work as educators as well, to help educate within the media. And perhaps if you could speak on that, I think that would be very helpful for the people who are online right now.
Well, if I'm getting what you're talking about there, reporters interview people regardless of who the interview subject is,
right,
looking for one of two things or both, either their opinion or facts or information.
Right.
So sometimes we have to determine, do you want my opinion on this, which is sometimes getting into kind of a controversial area, or you just want me to be the expert and tell you about such and such subject. So I think we need to be careful. And it's cool for our people, if a reporter calls and say, hey, can I talk to you about subject X, for you to say, okay, are you looking for my opinion on this, or you just need some information?
Right.
I think it's fine. That's a fair question back to that reporter. Mm-hmm. And if they're looking for your opinion, sometimes that can get into a tough area. But, and one other point I wanted to make just real quickly is that, but we want our people, particularly on the county level and extension, to think media, to be pitching story ideas to their local media, particularly their local paper. The thing is that we want you to pitch good ideas. We don't want you to pitch every little thing you are doing. And my big thing is always, for that local reporter to know you. And when they see your name and number pop up on their phone, they go, oh, when Chris calls, it's usually something pretty good. We don't want them to go, oh, geez, it's that extension agent again. That's the big thing. And that's where you have to make a decision about what I'm pitching here. Is it good? And kind of go through that checklist of things that make the story good.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is when I was doing the stories, I always avoided the opinion part because I knew that would get me in trouble. So I just tried to stick to those talking points.
Right.
And then I think above all, it's a relationship with the media. It is really thinking, how do I foster a relationship with this person or with this organization so that they like to see my name come up, and they also think of me when they have a topic related to food access or related to some behavioral economics topic. And, that means doing some things like weekend interviews. I remember Heather Kyle and I did one on a Saturday morning, and it was painful to be at that station at like 7:30 or 8 on a Saturday morning. But when you're trying to develop a relationship, you sometimes have to do those things that are just not fun for them to know that you're a reliable source and you're someone that they can call on.
And willing to do that.
And
I would point out that those early morning weekend newscasts, that's kind of the preferred time for my stories, like WTVF in Nashville. Those stations, those early morning weekend newscasts, the ratings are pretty high because that's the thing. People are getting up, they're eating breakfast, and they're seeing that. So that's a good time to be on, actually.
And like you said, as Chris has said, and Charles and Sandra, one of the things that's important is that relationship and being able to be a resource for that person. And if you don't have the answer or you don't have the person there, as Sandra said, I can find you somebody else who can talk to you about this at another location. You become that resource for that person, and you become a great source for them. So if the media calls and you don't have an answer for them, you don't have a person, just don't say, well, don't got anybody, sorry, nothing else to do for you. Really be a resource, kind of help dig for them, work your sources as well to find something to help them. Because while you may not get your publication, publicity at that point, or even, let's say, UTs, in Sandra's case, you still have worked with that person in the media. They will come back to you because they know you are a great resource for them, and that's part of that relationship building that you guys were talking about.
Yeah, and I think if we, the Institute, take the initiative many times with reporters, let's pitch a few story ideas, and the reporter starts, like you say, starts doing some of those stories, then it kind of goes in reverse. Then the reporter starts calling you.
Right.
And so that's how that relationship begins. But sometimes we have to take the initiative to kind of start that relationship.
Well, I wanted to open it up to any questions. Does anyone have any questions or comments that they would like to make? I see everybody's muted and they have their cameras off, so we're the only people who have our cameras on. One person who's on the call is Dr. Keith Belli, Department Head Forestry, Wildlife and Fisheries. And I've used him as a resource many times when I get a media call. And, do we have anybody available who can speak on a certain subject? One was about students volunteering to help fight some forest fires. But what I've really appreciated when I've called Dr. Belli's office is that he's very quick to respond. Or I email him. He's very quick. He always has an answer for me, and that's always very appreciative there as well. So that's something that when you're working with the media, again, that's that response time is very, very important. They work on a deadline, much tighter deadlines than we work on here. And if you respect their time and you're open with them and you're there for them, they're going to be almost like an ally for you. I always use the idea of it's Target versus Walmart. Target has an open media policy, and Charles and myself and Sandra, we can all speak to this. You can go to a Target, any Target in the country, and it's up to the manager to let you in to shoot video in that Target or take photos or interview it.
Use the restroom.
Or use the, yeah, exactly.
Now. Yeah, maybe not now.
Maybe not now, but it was. I think it still is. But they have this very open media policy, and it was smart on Target's part because you could go into a Target and all that red, people would know that you were in a Target. They were very open. Walmart, on the other hand, is very closed in what they do. We got to call Bentonville. We'll get back to you. Sometimes they'll stall you, and it may take a day or two before you get into it. The point I'm trying to make, and I'm getting around to, is that when Target had their massive data breach, the media reported it, and the media kept on the story, but they didn't crucify Target in the same way that this would have happened at a Walmart. If you get where I'm going here, they were much more open with the media, and they built that relationship with the media as an openness with them. And when push came to shove, when it came into a very controversial subject and not good news, the media reported it, but they didn't totally slam them. They gave them a lot of benefit of the doubt here. So I think that's kind of important in being open with the media, as you can be open with the media. That is very helpful. And in the long run, in the good times and in the bad times, especially if you hit some bad times, if you know that you've been straight with them, they're going to be straight with you, and they're not going to come looking for you on some kind of a witch hunt. So I think that's important to know as well. So we're coming up at 10:51. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to put in the chat box before we wrap it up? They're a shy group. That's why they're not on camera. All right. Anything you all would like to add before we wrap it up?
I'm good. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you.
Good discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Sandra, for also adding some thoughts.
Yes, thanks, Sandra.
As well. Thank you all. This is going to be recorded. For those of you who didn't make it, you missed asking some great questions from some great people here, but it will be on YouTube. So thank you all for joining us, and we really, really appreciate it. And we'll see you next month at the UTIA Communicators Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.